Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first full-length episode of the Healthy Honeys podcast. My name is Holly, and I wanted to share my wild pregnancy story today. This show is going to be centered around taking full responsibility for our health and giving you the resources to actually make informed decisions when practicing bodily autonomy. And this story is basically my first in-the-world experience like that. And especially because the system we have surrounding pregnancy and birth is so coercive, I wanted to share my experience outside of it. And next episode in part 2, we'll be talking about my autonomous, medically unassisted birth with my daughter. Now, what is a wild pregnancy, you may ask? It's kind of a weird name. A wild pregnancy is basically just a pregnancy that you decide to not treat as a medical condition, and you elect to not get any ultrasounds, invasive medical testing, or really any industrialized medical care that pertains to your pregnancy and birth. And you do this in an educated way. You don't just say, I'm not doing that because I don't feel like it. You're doing it because we're often not told about the side effects that happen because of the ultrasounds, because of these medical tests. And I will go into that a little bit more in the Q&A portion of this episode. But basically, it's trusting your body through the process and not pathologizing a very normal bodily process. I chose to do a wild pregnancy mostly because of my background in the medical system. For those who aren't familiar with me, I'll give you the Cliff Notes. Since I was a kid, my health has been micromanaged by the system. I was on constant antibiotics for UTIs when I was very young. My parents didn't know what to do, so they outsourced to doctors who then went totally nuclear. By age 14, I was super sick. I was literally not able to walk. And then I was in the hospital for 2 months and diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder called Wegener's granulomatosis. By 21, my kidneys were failing and I needed a kidney transplant. My beautiful sister Shelby saved my life and gave me her spare. All through this, I was being a good little patient, not knowing or not really looking into why I kept getting sicker every time I went by the doctor's advice. Turns out there's a lot of evidence that certain medications like antibiotics and certain medical interventions that will not be mentioned right now have been linked to my autoimmune disease, and those certain medical interventions happen to be something I partook in right before getting deathly ill at age 14. So when I found that out, it was kind of a red pill. I started looking into alternative health. I was seeing results by changing my diet and getting off a lot of my medications. And then 2020 hit. As I'm sure is true for many of you, the past 2.5 years have been a wake-up call. I had some idea that the medical system was profiting off of my illness, the pharmaceutical companies specifically, and I started looking into alternative ways to treat it. But coming across people like Agnes von der Planets, who talk about what the system is actually up to, but actually living in this hellhole the past 2.5 years while relying on the medical system really opened my eyes. So when I got pregnant, I knew I could not participate, at least fully, in the system. And I've seen the man behind the curtain. I can't really go back. But I'm not going to lie, this was a very hard decision, especially with all the unlearning I had to do this pregnancy totally wild. At the beginning, I did not even have an idea of doing that. I was referred to a high-risk OBGYN in the big city near us because of my kidney transplant. I already knew that my fertility was totally fine. My health at the time was really, really good, and I wanted to avoid as much medical intervention as possible. But that would not happen with a high-risk clinic. I've heard enough nightmare stories of women having unnecessary interventions, C-sections unnecessarily, and I truly do believe that women are made to birth. If that wasn't the case, the continuation of the species is a total accident, right? Of course, there are outliers where women die in childbirth, but it's not nearly as common as they'd have you believe, and I think they want us to believe that there are saviors when it comes to childbirth. So I had all of this in my head when I got the call from the high-risk clinic, and I hear the clerk say, it says here you're not jabbed. So that started a weird conversation, and long story short, after that conversation, I started calling around midwives to see if they would take me. Then I learned where I live, Canada, specifically Alberta, midwifery is regulated by the provincial government. It's regulated by the medical system, aka you have to be educated and answer to the medical system, or you aren't a registered midwife, and I put quotations around registered. Because these midwives are paid by the government, they follow their rules and wouldn't take me at all. I was too risky. And you know what? I'm really glad that they didn't. I was able to then go down a major rabbit hole in free birthing, traditional midwives, how the obstetric system, I think I'm saying that right, obstetric system actually works, and it saved my birth. I was able to find the most awesome woman who practices as a traditional midwife, and she witnessed my birth. I love how much she respects the autonomy of the mothers she helps. I'm so excited because she said she would come onto my podcast and talking traditional midwifery. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be really exciting. So that's the story of why I chose to do a wild pregnancy. Let's talk about how it went, and I'll give more details besides just the word smooth because that's just how I've been describing it lately. After deciding, I basically said, well, let's see how this goes. I'm not going to pathologize it. My husband was on board, but I was still worried. But I noticed that if I brought up how many weeks I was along to anybody, they would ask me how the ultrasound went, or they would say, who's going to deliver your baby? Apparently me isn't the answer that they were going for. I tried not to talk about milestones too much with other people. I think discretion was a big thing that I really needed to learn in this experience. But outside of other people, I was nervous that I might not have been making the right decision. Years of conditioning had to be unlearned. And I listened to a lot of books and podcasts and watched a ton of birth videos, home birth videos, birth videos of people who I would like to have a similar birth to them, to make sure that I was comfortable with the idea of giving birth. At certain points, I was feeling so in tune with my body and my baby because I abstained from any testing. Because I didn't get the ultrasound at 13 weeks or whatever for the dating one, my first time meeting her was when I was like 14 weeks along and I could feel her kicks for the first time. It was so cool. It felt like an alien, but it was really cool. I could feel when she rolled around, when she was getting ready to drop, when I was like very far along. And no one knew if she was a boy or a girl until I gave birth. It might sound hippy-dippy, but the mystery of it was really cool. It was really beautiful. I was so convinced I was having a boy, but she came out and I was totally proven wrong. And there were times where I wasn't sure. I was worried about this ache or that pain or whether my baby was growing enough. My belly wasn't as big as other women's who were in the same amount of weeks along. But what this experience taught me was to sit in that feeling, to really weigh whether or not it was logical to be worried, and to make a decision based on that. It wasn't logical to go in and get an ultrasound when I knew that I'm pretty tall and a baby had a lot more space to grow inside of me than a girl who's like 5'2". I also could find plenty of information on preeclampsia, aches and pains from the hormone relaxin going through my body, and gestational diabetes. Nothing worried me so much because I was listening to my intuition and also doing my own research pretty much constantly. Now, this story is a little embarrassing, but a good example of using my intuition and about how not everything needs to be a trip to the doctor when you're pregnant. I was standing in our room when I was about 5 months along, and my belly was starting to look more like, a pregnant belly rather than just eating a big meal. I was having a bit of nerve pain, so I was rubbing the skin just above either of my hip joints. And they, you were rubbing fast, like when you rub your hands together when you're cold. All of a sudden, I felt a gush of liquid come out of me, and it didn't smell like anything. I was startled and thought, oh my gosh, did my water just break from that? But I sat down and I tried to figure out what happened instead of panicking and running to the hospital. And you have to understand, that's basically how I've lived my whole life. If I ever felt a pain or a weird symptom, I would immediately go to an expert, as the world deemed them, and get them to tell me what was wrong with my body. I never sat in my own experience and tried to resolve issues myself, which now I feel like I have the ability to do. Of course, I still think that certain things like medical tests can help you make informed decisions. I'm not against data. I'm against the lack of personal responsibility in the medical system, and I'm against coercion and agendas that are able to take place because of the lack of personal responsibility. And when I say medical tests, I mean things that don't have any crazy side effects. I still get blood work done because I'm interested in seeing what my minerals and nutrients and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But back to the story. I'd felt a bit weird, in my bladder just before it happened, and I Googled whether or not pee always smells like pee. Okay, I told you this is a weird story. Bear with me. Turns out it doesn't always, which my midwife later confirmed after I told her this. If you're well hydrated with lots of minerals, it doesn't always smell like pee. I also waited for a little while to see how the baby felt. I could feel her kicking around like normal, no intense kicks, no lack of movement. After a couple of hours of being very careful and very introspective, I realized it probably was just that I got kicked in the bladder at the same time as doing that weird rubbing thing, and I peed myself. I'm sorry. Everything was totally fine. Now, if I had felt intuitively that something was really wrong, I would have acted differently. If I'd lost my mucus plug or more liquid was coming out or anything like that, like a slow drip of amniotic fluid, I would have probably acted differently. But thankfully, it was just a lesson on not panicking. Okay, now I asked you guys on Instagram what questions you had for me about my wild pregnancy, so let's get into those. Now, number 1, did you opt out of all ultrasounds? Yes, I did. So I'll share some resources in the show notes, but I'm also going to read part of a blog post that my midwife has on her website. Quote, ultrasound waves are high-frequency sound waves that produce an image on a screen from the echo of these waves on tissues, a developing baby in the womb. For reference, audible sound waves travel at 1 to 20,000 cycles per second, whereas ultrasound waves travel at 1 to 20 million waves per second. These waves emit heat, sound, as well as burst air pockets, gas, potentially causing deleterious effects to developing lungs, intestines, and brains, end quote. She goes on to say later in the post, quote, how many times have we heard the story of the baby playing hide and seek with the ultrasound technician and how cute it was? While the ultrasound may be inaudible to the mother or to the technician and the others in the room, inside a water-filled womb, the sound waves have been likened to a helicopter taking off right next to your head or as loud as a subway coming into a station. These high-frequency sound waves do also produce heat, which may contribute to cellular damage and are potentially linked to miscarriage. And then she says that she has personally experienced a miscarriage following an ultrasound, end quote. Now, I know 2 separate women who have experienced the same thing. Many would say that it's a coincidence, but that's the thing, we don't know. Even the FDA admits that there isn't enough research on ultrasounds to say that they're perfectly safe, and doesn't even recommend women going in for elective sonograms or using Dopplers at home during pregnancy. Another element of choosing to not get ultrasounds is the pathologizing of pregnancy and birth. Very often, women will go in thinking that they're going to see their baby and leave thinking they're going to need a C-section, or even worse, having been told that they need to abort this baby because it has some kind of health problem. For each what if, there is a better option. If you have a placenta previa, it has been shown that previas resolve themselves in at least 80% of the time. If you are worried about position, hiring a traditional midwife who knows how to palpate a belly can tell you whether your baby is head down, breech, whether their head is engaged or not, etc. If you're worried about Down syndrome, genetic disease, know that so many women have been told in their ultrasounds that their baby is going to have a hard, short, miserable life if they don't elect to kill them, and yet, when the baby is born, the condition is much less severe than anticipated or non-existent. My friend Naomi is a great example of this. Her mother was told that Naomi would have severe Down syndrome and muscular dystrophy and probably wouldn't survive a few months after birth. Well, big surprise, Naomi was born perfectly healthy and is obviously very grateful that her parents didn't abort her like the doctor wanted them to. Okay, that was an intense first question. Let's move to the second one. Did you do your own labs and such? So yes, a lot of women who do wild pregnancies don't have any medical stuff done. I personally decided to do that in regards to the pregnancy alone, but I did get blood work done for my kidney transplant and nutrient markers and, other things that I just look at. Someone asked about a fear of animal products during pregnancy. And no, I didn't really have that. I've taken the liver pill. I took the Weston A. Price Foundation's advice and I upped my annual fat intake to make sure my baby was getting all the fat-soluble vitamins. I started out this pregnancy actually pretty underweight. I was really stressed out when I first got pregnant, just from what was going on in the world. But once I got pregnant, I had something else to focus on. I was so excited. I was able to then, focus on my diet. And I gained quite a bit of weight, purposefully, but, I gained as much as I could, and I wanted to make sure that my baby was going to be as healthy as possible. So, let me see, what did I say here? I really prioritized minerals as well to make sure the baby wasn't stripping too much of mine, because that does happen. That really happened to my mom. She apparently, her dentist told her to stop having kids because her teeth were getting really affected. I'll be posting a what I ate in a day while pregnant on Instagram soon, so stay tuned for that. And I'll update with a breastfeeding one too. But yeah, at least 4 egg yolks a day, raw eggs, raw milk and butter, lots of meat, lots of bone broth, lots of organ meats to make sure that my amino acid profiles were fine. And of course, a ton of ice cream. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't living off of Haagen-Dazs strawberry ice cream. I love that stuff. Someone asked if I was afraid. At certain points, yes, but I was more afraid of not doing it in reference to wild pregnancy and autonomous birth. I'm deathly afraid of the medical system. I've been used and abused, and I knew that they were going to do the same thing to my baby, and I was not going to let that happen. Someone asked for a do's and don'ts list. So, okay, do your own research from people who have the same mindset as you. Do find a traditional midwife who believes in your ability to physiological birth. Do ask that traditional midwife a million questions to make sure that you're a good fit, okay? Do lean into the mystery that is pregnancy. Remember that we're animals too, and no one pathologizes the pregnancy of a cat, and yet here we are, with 1 million stray cats in our town. Don'ts. Don't read books like What to Expect When You're Expecting and take them at face value. I always like to read them and just dispose of the things that don't make sense. That one specifically, I threw out like literally 90% of the book. But there's also the problem that you might freak yourself out and might start seeing symptoms that you didn't see before for no reason. Another don't expect other people to understand what you're doing. Discretion really is the best option. Don't be afraid of raw animal foods. They're some of the most nutritious foods on the planet, and you're more likely to get E. coli from lettuce than raw milk. And yes, if you're craving sushi, get it. I love sushi. I ate sushi throughout my whole pregnancy. Well, I ate it a few times. I don't eat sushi all the time, but I did drink raw milk constantly, tons of raw eggs. I was totally fine, and I'm immunocompromised. So, next question is, do you think you worried more or less than if you had medical checkups? Definitely less. I know that there was the unknown. The unknown worried me, but I also knew that arguing with every doctor I saw about why I wasn't getting ultrasounds, why I didn't want genetic testing, why I wouldn't be giving birth in a hospital, that would stress me out. Before and after the appointments, I'd probably get so angry. And I was also worried that if I went through the medical system even a little bit, they'd put it on my file that I didn't receive proper medical care during pregnancy. That file is accessible to Child Protective Services, and I was more worried about that. Was there any point where you thought, I should get this? Yeah, at certain points, I didn't feel so great energy-wise, and at the end of the pregnancy, I was getting some water retention in my feet. So I pulled out my old blood pressure machine and took my blood pressure daily to see if there was any change, and there wasn't. I have low blood pressure most of the time, and my blood pressure did go up to normal. But yeah, I also got blood work done for myself out of curiosity, and everything was fine. I just didn't realize how tired you got when you're 35 weeks pregnant. Did you take any supplements? Yes, I did. I rejected the conventional prenatal vitamins. They're full of synthetic garbage. Your body doesn't know what to do with them. Instead, I opted for my own combo, and I was also very careful. I wanted to make sure that I was getting enough folate and, all the good stuff. Early on in the first trimester, I was having serious food aversions. I could not handle raw liver or cooked liver, so I started taking really high-quality beef liver supplements from Higher Health. They're based in Alberta, so I feel pretty confident about that choice. Then I also took magnesium glycinate, Shilajit, MSM powder, but I also prioritized bone broth and gelatin in my in my diet to make sure I was getting enough of the full variety of amino acids. I'll do a post on Instagram on that soon. I did also take methylene blue on occasion. It hasn't been researched much in pregnancy, but I feel comfortable doing a low dose. It helped my energy and cognition. I loved it in the last 2 months. If you'd like to try it, I have a coupon code HealthyHealthyHolly for 10% off at lifeblood.com. They have a bunch of other supplements and tinctures that I've actually started taking since breastfeeding. Did you take any herbs or tinctures? During the pregnancy, I did use dandelion root tea to make sure my blood pressure was stable and improve my fat absorption. Not an herb, but I ate a lot of bee pollen, getting all the B vitamins. As for tinctures, no, but my midwife gave me a bunch when I was giving birth. That's a big part of the story, so I'll be sure to share more about that in the next episode. But now I do take reishi and chaga from Lifeblood, and I'm really liking them. How did you overcome fear? Did you work on this before or during? So one major factor in my overcoming fear is that my husband also really trusts the birth process. He's always thought it was stupid that women were told to give birth on their backs in hospitals, and whenever I told him something about the medical interventions that happened during birth and pregnancy, he would always just say, "That's so stupid." So having a partner that supports you and understands the facts about physiological birth will totally set your mind at ease because you're not worried about them. But actually during pregnancy, I did read a hypnobirthing book called Mindful Hypnobirthing. I think the book and the tracks did set my mind at ease, but actually in labor, I couldn't get myself into the right headspace for it. But it was very relaxing during the pregnancy. It wasn't also new agey at all or very hippie. I had someone send me some other tracks that they started talking about goddess energy, and I couldn't not roll my eyes. It was really taking me out of the relaxation. So I just went back to the practical tracks from Mindful Hypnobirthing. I also saw the Christian Hypnobirthing app, but I didn't use it myself. But I'm sure I would have liked it because they really do share great scriptures shared on their Instagram, ones that I was thinking about constantly through the birthing process. Someone else asked, how did I deal with the fear or stress of birth and healthy baby? And that's pretty much the same answer, but I did want to add again that we need to lean into the mystery of pregnancy and childbirth. As soon as I say I don't like hippies, right? There are elements of life, and especially big events like childbirth, that you really can't truly prepare for. And as Marcus Aurelius said, you often suffer more in imagination than in reality. Not saying I didn't stress or get worried, but that's what I tried to keep in mind. Would you recommend a wild pregnancy to someone with medical conditions? Yeah, I mean, okay, wait. This is complicated, so I'll start off by saying that this isn't medical advice. Nothing on this podcast is medical advice. But if I had a friend close to me who had health issues and they had shaken her confidence in her body and I knew she was working at nourishing herself and she loved her freedom, I would 100% recommend it. I hope someday I can help other women achieve what I was able to achieve because it helped my confidence so much. And I was able to have an uninterrupted connection with my daughter from the very beginning. I would say to everyone to consider birthing at home without the medical system because I truly don't think pregnancy is a medical condition. Another thing is, I don't think that you would be able to get pregnant unless your body believed itself capable of actually giving birth. Now, maybe you experience health problems along the way, but a lot of that has to do with how nourished you are. But look at me, I spent 2 years on cyclophosphamide, a toxic chemotherapy. Since then, I've been on and off other immunosuppressants and prednisone because of my autoimmune disease and now my kidney transplant. I've been able to get off a lot of these medications through lifestyle changes, but because of the fact that my kidney is not technically my own, DNA-wise, my body will attack it and kill it as soon as it's given the chance. So I have to stay on a low dose of immunosuppressants for the rest of my life. And yet I was able to give birth at home, no medical intervention the entire 9 months, and I was able to have a perfectly healthy little girl. Women are made with the inherent ability to give birth, and it rocks. Okay, last question is, what did I do to heal my hormones and have healthy eggs after cyclophosphamide, or Cytoxan, which I think is the name for it in the States? Okay, so I did a whole talk on how I helped my fertility after chemotherapy for teen vasculitis, and I will link that in the show notes as well, and I think I'm going to post it as a podcast as well. But the biggest thing was making sure that my body knew it was in a state of abundance and not in a state of stress. I did that through nutrition, managing personal stresses, and lowering my toxic load. I was very careful in the past few years to eat well, whole foods, with plenty of all 3 macros, easy to digest carbs like organic white rice, fruit, honey, high quality and often raw saturated fat. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for listening to the whole episode. I appreciate you, and I really hope you got something out of it. If you're interested in listening to my birth story, please follow this show on whatever platform you're listening on, and follow me on Instagram to know when it's ready and uploaded. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to me on Instagram. It's at healthyholly, and I'll try and help as best as I can. And follow this podcast's Instagram at healthyhoneys pod. Talk to you next time. Bye.